Hello, and welcome to this afternoon's discussion focused on implementing and enhancing bystander reporting programs in K-12 schools. On behalf of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, welcome to the latest installment of our virtual training series for the K-12 community. My name is Paige Settles, and I am a member of the CISA School Safety Task Force. I'm excited to serve as your moderator today. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules and school days to tune into this conversation. We're grateful for your shared commitment to creating the safest learning environments for young people. The CISA School Safety Task Force has the singular purpose of strengthening and enhancing the safety and security of K-12 schools across the country. Our team does this in a variety of ways. Our work includes coordinating federal efforts on school safety, educating K-12 communities to raise awareness of security threats and related resources, as well as building the capacity of schools and districts to prevent violence and mitigate the impacts of emergency events. Our virtual training series tackles topics of critical importance to school leaders. We strive to lift the voices from the community to discuss the scope of challenges, strategies to address, lessons learned from colleagues, and share resources and tools that you can access to improve safety in your school community. I'm so pleased to be joined today by two incredible leaders in the K-12 community. Emily Torek is the Executive Director of the Ohio School Safety Center and the co-chair of the National School Safety Alliance, or NSSA. The Ohio School Safety Center is the central resource for all things school safety for the state of Ohio. Their work includes building strong partnerships with other agencies, first responders, and school officials, as well as identifying best practices and training opportunities to assist schools in preventing, preparing for, and responding to acts of violence for both K-12 and higher education. Stephen Driscoll is the Assistant Chief of the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center, also known as NTAC. Stephen oversees NTAC's training, consultation, and outreach on behavioral threat assessment and the prevention of targeted violence, including school violence. I'm so grateful to have both of them here today. Before we get started, I want to share a couple of housekeeping items to keep in mind. First, all of our participants' microphones are disabled to avoid any unexpected background noise and to ensure that you can hear our wonderful panelists. Second, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find a question and answer panel. Throughout the discussion, you're welcome to submit questions through that feature. We've saved some time later in the discussion for our panelists to address the questions that you may have submitted. Throughout today's session, you'll also want to keep an eye out for alert messages from our team, which will include resource links, additional information about what our panelists discuss, and a link for live captioning of today's event, as well as technical guidance to support your experience. Finally, you can also check in to register your attendance with the link to a poll in the Q&A panel. That helps us get a sense of who's participating in today's event. And for those of you seeking a participation certificate for this session, please make sure to complete this poll as well as the poll at the end of the training to register your attendance. So now that we've gone through some of those upfront items, let's get started. Today we're going to take a deep look at bystander reporting systems in K-12 schools, what they are, what makes them credible, and what makes young people willing to use them. We will discuss responding and addressing to tips received, and ultimately how we maximize the opportunity to identify and intervene before a young person moves to harm themselves or others. Reporting programs are designed to provide students, staff, and other community members with a trusted pathway for seeking help and reporting concerns when issues arrive involving student wellness or school safety. We know that when K-12 schools are made aware of a potential threat to school or student safety, they can more effectively intervene with the appropriate resources and assistance for that individual. We also know that students may often be best positioned as the first to notice potential concerning behaviors in their peers or to hear of threats that may need to be reported. So we want to make sure that students are familiar with their school's reporting systems and are willing to use them to report concerns. These reporting systems can include everything from tip lines and phone numbers to online incident forms and mobile apps. And the research shows just how critical of a tool reporting systems can be in preventing targeted school violence, as well as other concerns that may be present in the school environment. So today we want to dive deeper into the discussion of how to maximize the effectiveness and use of reporting programs. I'm thrilled to have two great experts here today to help us do just that. So Emily and Stephen, welcome. Excited to have you both here.
Thank you.
So to get started, let's take a look at a quick video of what bystander reporting might look like in Emily's home state of Ohio.
Did you hear about that freshman at lunch talking about how he is sick and tired of being bullied by everyone? He said he'd had enough and it was time for payback.
I don't know what was going on, but he seemed really mad.
I know. Do you think we should tell someone about it?
We should probably text the Safer Ohio School tip line so someone can look into it.
What's that?
It's Ohio's anonymous 24/7 reporting system that anyone can call or text. It's a way for us to share safety concerns with our school, even outside of school hours.
That sounds easy to use.
It is. I called once when a friend from another school posted online about hurting herself. You can use the tip line to report any unusual or suspicious behavior.
Wow. This definitely seems to fit, but should we? I don't want anyone to think we tattled on them.
I get it, but remember, the Safer Ohio School tip line lets you report anonymously. Plus, I've always heard see something, say something.
That makes sense. I think we should report it, just to be safe.
Let's do it.
So that clip gave us a brief glimpse into bystander reporting and was actually developed by some of the students that work with the Ohio School Safety Center, which is a great way to get students involved in school safety. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Emily, to start, can you share a little bit about what bystander reporting programs are and why building a culture where students feel empowered to come forward with those concerns about the wellness of themselves or others is so important to school safety?
So bystander reporting programs provide a vehicle for sharing information, particularly its concerns for safety. It could be from a parent or guardian, a community member, a staff member, or a student, but there's a lot of information that needs to get in the hands of people that can actually do something about it. So it provides that vehicle to get it to the school, to get it to first responders, someone that can investigate and act on it. So it's really a vehicle, if you will. It's really important to empower students to report to these tip lines and various options because you don't know what you don't know. And oftentimes our students are in the best position, our family members, our staff, they see and hear everything going on in the school that us as adults or leadership may not necessarily see. And it's able to give us that extra information to be able to avert different things going on. We can intervene, we can provide support and resources that we otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Absolutely, and I think that's a lived experience that we all feel when we're able to interact with someone who's successfully used one of these bystander reporting programs. So in the broader spectrum, Stephen, what does the data and research tell us that's important about reporting and averting violence?
The data tells us that bystander reporting saves lives. The Secret Service has been studying targeted violence for decades, including school violence specifically since the Columbine tragedy in 1999. One of our original studies called the Safe School Initiative, which we published just a few years after the Columbine shooting, found that in many cases, other students knew about the attacker's plan in the weeks or months or sometimes years preceding the act of violence. We had a follow-up study we published in 2008 called the Bystander study that actually explored why students wouldn't bring that information forward. I think we'll talk more about this later, but a lot of that has to do with school culture and climate. And then more recently, in 2021, the Secret Service published a study called Averting Targeted School Violence, and that looked at 67 serious school attack plots that were prevented. So these were 67 cases where a student had not only made a threat or had an idea to attack their school, but actually had developed a plan and had taken steps to advance the plan. In nearly all of the 67 cases, the tragedy was prevented because of bystander reporting. There were only a couple instances that were prevented otherwise, and that was because the plotter themselves brought the information forward. So it was like self-identification. But without question, we see time and again that when students in particular have information, we need to facilitate bringing the information forward, and lives can be saved.
And honestly, that's so rare in what we do, is to have data and to have instances that say, this is where lives were saved, this is where we can prove the negative and say that this would have happened if it weren't for this experience. So it's really powerful to be able to see the data of what actually was averted and how it was averted. So just really underscores the importance of that.
Yeah.
So obviously, we've still continued to see school threats as a rising issue that schools are facing, but we've seen a lot of success stories. In just the past month, we've seen situations in Tennessee, Wisconsin, Indiana, Texas, and in Florida where lives were likely saved and violence was averted in schools because of bystander reporting, just as you're talking about. So can you provide examples of some common reports that students submit or scenarios that are likely to prompt a report? And as we're thinking about this, what are some of those common pathways and methods that young people might report those concerns through?
Sure. So the first part of that question about what students report, there's a broad spectrum, right? And absolutely, reporting programs are going to receive reports of student threats and planned acts of school violence. But we also see so frequently, especially in statewide reporting apps like you have in Ohio, you're also receiving reports of bullying and depression and suicidality and self-harm, abuse in the home, things like that. And so the foundation of school violence prevention is really promoting student wellness first and foremost. And so absolutely we want avenues to hear about any threats of violence or concerns that a student might hurt themselves or others, but we also want to cast a wide net to find that opportunity to get students help. So if students are being bullied or have mental health issues or problems at home, providing them multiple avenues to bring that to an adult who cares and can help is really your best starting point.
So thinking of the avenues that you can report through, there's a lot of different options that states offer. Typically, you could do a web form or you could do it online, smartphone applications, call, text. There's a lot of options out there. And in fact, in Ohio specifically, we did a focus group with some students that talked about, what are you more likely to use? And shockingly, at times, they said, we want a text message or we want a smartphone application. And I thought for sure they wouldn't want to download yet another app, but they did. They wanted to use those platforms. They wanted to use a web form. So there are lots of options for them to report through. But I will certainly say that being able to report to a trusted adult, there's nothing wrong with that either. And that is definitely an option in a school that we want to encourage.
That's an incredibly important point, and I think as the classic millennial who hates talking to someone on the telephone, I think being able to have someone who you can reach out to individually, being able to use a smartphone app, and also having still those regular methods that we were used to as we grew up, using the telephone, using speaking to someone individually can be helpful too, because we're not just thinking about students, we're thinking about all of the school community members. If a coach or a parent learns of concerning information, we want them to have avenues they can use to come forward too. So I think that's really important to be able to have a variety of different methods available. Fantastic. So I think what you really underscored there is the importance of having these programs in place and folks being able to come forward. But we of course know that they're not all created equal. We want to make sure that we can implement the best practices and make sure that this is a program folks can use and can triage. So because what works for one community might not work for another, or it might look different in another community, what are some options that schools should be considering when they're designing and implementing these reporting programs?
Yeah, so I think what you're asking about is what are the principles that the program should be built on, right? And so the teams at CISA and Secret Service partnered just last year to publish Improving School Safety through Bystander Reporting. It's a toolkit, co-branded Secret Service and CISA product that really establishes, that's research-based first and foremost, and then it establishes those foundational principles that can be shared by a state, by a county, a school district, or an individual school. Anybody who's looking to develop a reporting program that's geared toward students reporting. It establishes the necessity for multiple avenues of reporting, right? Like we said, we know students are going to report through apps, but they also, I believe, Safe to Tell in Colorado, who's one of the states that publishes their reporting data, last year had most of the reports come through the web page, right? And as opposed to the app itself. So having a web page, the smartphone app, phone number, text messaging, all those multiple avenues for students to report through is one of those foundational principles. Having 24/7 accessibility. We know that tips are going to come in over the weekend, Sunday morning, before school starts on a Monday. They need to have 24/7 accessibility. Students need to have the ability to report anonymously or at least confidentiality, because we know from our research that that is so important in promoting bystander reporting through students. responsiveness. Students that's one of the ways to develop trust in the program, is having the culture around the program for students to know that they're going to elicit a response, and that if they report that a classmate's being bullied, they're going to see the result of their reporting, they're going to see that student getting help. And training is so important. Everybody has a role to play in violence prevention, so it's not just school staff, it's of course the students who need to be trained on what to report and how, but also other members of the community, like parents, who need to know, if my student brings a concern home, I know as a parent that they have this avenue available to them to report.
That's great, and I think that you hit on so many different best practices there.
It's all in the toolkit.
It is, yes. So that's the shameless plug for downloading the toolkit to
Yep.
get more information on all those great best practices. And Emily, what have you seen in your experience in terms of best practices and implementation?
So I think one of the things that we often forget about when we implement a program is to do progress checks, to look to see if there's any opportunities to advance things a little bit further. So one of the things we did in Ohio was that we looked at, what are the things that are part of our tip line that are just not really there for people. So we found that we needed to have multiple language options for our families, that English might not be their primary language, but they have information to report. We had received a couple of tips in Spanish, and we weren't able to instantly be able to talk to them to the point where they hung up. And so we didn't get the information that we needed when we probably could have helped somebody if we had it. So language options was one of the things that we thought we needed to advance with. Having crisis response professionals on the line. We all know that 988 is out there, and it's a really great resource, and more people need to learn about it. But if you're contacting a state's tip line, whether it's Colorado, us here, or Pennsylvania or some other state, they need to be able to deal with the case in front of them. So if a student is having suicidality, then they need to be able to talk to them and know how to talk to them. And so that was one of the other main things that we wanted to improve. So constantly reevaluating the programs that you have set up and looking to see if there's avenues for improvement, I think is really an important component of having an anonymous reporting solution or bystander programs.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you've both hit on a couple of times now, which is that we're not really just looking at one type of report that's coming in. We're looking at people who come forward with a variety of different concerns that might be about themselves, another specific person, or an entire community. And so we want to be set up to help with a variety of different concerns and to help folks who are coming from a variety of different perspectives and viewpoints to access the information that they need. And that's, I think, a lot easier said than done. So we face a lot of challenges when we're trying to implement those, which is one of the reasons we're even here today talking about how to share some of those best practices and the lessons learned that you all have had from your great work. So I think that lends really well to how we can continue to respond to these threats and respond to these reports of concerns that we've had. So because making those decisions once we receive the tip, not just on how we can respond in the moment when the tip comes through, but how we can take action regarding potential safety concerns and issues that are complex and challenge, it's really important to involve professionals from other aspects of the field as well and other perspectives that are vital to the process. So how can multidisciplinary behavioral threat assessment and management teams work together to respond to these reports and provide interventions to students? I think we can start with Emily on this one this time.
Yeah, so one of the things that we tell our schools is when you get a tip that comes in through your reporting program, you should run it through some of your behavioral threat assessment folks. So having your school counselor, your school resource officer, some administrative members, a teacher, having different people that see the student in different aspects of the day can help shed light on different things, right? So if a student is having issues at home, maybe the counselor knows about that. So they're going to be able to shed light on why did they make a joke about a threat in the classroom? Did they really mean it, or is there something else going on? So having the ability to have a multidisciplinary group help you when some of these pieces of information come in is really helpful to diagnose, if you will, those tips as they come into the tip line.
That's a great point, and I think you all see this quite a bit in your research as well, Stephen.
Yeah, and once you open the door to reporting, which you want, and you want it to be widely used, you're going to receive a broad scope of types of reports, right? And so triaging definitely becomes really important, especially with smartphone apps. You could have a student who's reporting from inside the school building and says, I heard a rumor that a classmate has a gun in their backpack today. And obviously, like in a moment like that, it's not going to be the time to convene a multidisciplinary team to analyze the report. you're going to meet that with probably an immediate law enforcement response because there's an imminent public safety risk. So there needs to be that frontline capability to sort of triage for imminent threats to life. And then once you're free of that concern or past that concern, you can take the time to see, is this a report of bullying where a student needs counselor support from the school or support from a teacher? Is this a mental health issue where we need to involve the family and seek treatment, whether it's through the school or from an outside provider? Or do we see concern for safety of self or others? And that's definitely when you would want to pull in your multidisciplinary behavioral threat assessment team. That could be reports of course, threats or planned acts of school violence. But if somebody reports that a classmate's infatuated with the Columbine shooter or the Parkland shooter, that could also warrant a BTAM response. Hurting animals would be the type of thing that would warrant a BTAM response. So in developing the team, one of the 8 steps that we recommend in our Enhancing School Safety Guide that the Secret Service published for K-12 behavioral threat assessment programs is to define those prohibited and concerning behaviors, basically lay out what are the types of reports that are going to warrant that multidisciplinary response.
That's a fantastic resource and a fantastic point for folks to dig into, because I think something that you really emphasize quite a bit at NTAC is that there's not one specific indicator that someone is going to move to violence against themselves or others, but the more information we get about what a student is experiencing, the more we can understand their environment, understand what they're experiencing, and get them the help that they need.
For sure, and actually, I mean, the types of concerns that we know these reporting programs receive, the bullying, depression, self-harm, suicidality, all indicate students that are in need of supports that they're probably not receiving. But we also know from the research that those are the types of behaviors that, in rare cases, can precede acts of targeted school violence. And so it all points us back to early intervention.
Absolutely. And I think you made a really good point, too, about what we need to do immediately in the moment, and then we also need to think about this as a long-term set of care for both the student and for the community. And I think that's something that you've spoken a lot to in Ohio's work as well, Emily, right?
Absolutely, and I think one of the benefits to running it through a BTAM team like that, when appropriate, is that you can set up student action plans. And I don't know if that's something that every state does, but you check in with these students at regular intervals to see, are their needs still being met? You know, do they need more assistance? Are they continuing to make threats of violence against themselves or others? You know, what is going on with this student? Just to check in. And it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be much, but having that regular kind of reminder that you should check in is really appropriate. We all get busy. We all have a million things on our plate, but checking in with that student can go a really long way, and making sure that, you know, this isn't going to happen again.
Right, and I think that's where, again, bringing multiple folks to the table can be really helpful, because it doesn't have to all fall on one person to check in with all of the students who may be experiencing behavioral concerns or concerns in their own lives. We have a team of folks who can continue to do this follow-up and who can work throughout the school community to make sure that the students are getting continuous support even beyond one particular report. That's great. And so I think that leads really well into the next topic that we wanted to discuss, which is getting students involved and the challenges that we might face with increasing the willingness of students to come forward. Because we know that there are so many factors that can influence whether students feel comfortable coming forward with information once they learn it. So reporting systems can play that valuable role in increasing our community's confidence in that feeling of safety, but we have to get students to be able to participate in that role. So can we talk about some of the factors that might contribute to a student's willingness to report their concerns? And in that same vein, what are school reporting programs not? Emily?
So I think the biggest thing with this is trust. So if I'm a student and I have information about your safety, I want to make sure that I report it. But if I report it and nobody does anything about it, then I'm not going to be likely to report it again, because what's the point? Why take the time out of my day to report something if nobody's going to do anything about it? Or say I report a genuinely held belief about a concern for safety, and then I'm punished for it. Or, you know, everybody's pointing at me like, why would you do this? Why would you share this information? That kind of a thing. So trust that when you report something, the administrators are going to do something about it. They're going to investigate it. They're going to believe that, you genuinely had this belief about something going to happen, and having that trust that they'll do something about it and without fear of retribution is a huge thing for it. And I think one of the things that our students fear the most is, am I really tattling on my friend? I know they don't want this information shared. I know that they're cutting themselves in the evenings. I don't want them to be mad at me. And I'm the only person that would know about this. And so I think making sure that they know the importance of helping their peers. We always say in Ohio, speak up, save lives, saved by the tell. So we do a little joke with that one. But it really is it's a way to share information to help your peers, not to have any sort of tattling or anything like that going on.
Exactly. I think that's a great point. And Stephen, I think you all have seen a lot of the same information.
Yeah, I mean, Emily nailed it. Of course, we've heard from students and from schools from places like Ohio and across the country where students engage with these apps and they report something like bullying, that they've observed a classmate on the bus being bullied or things like that. And then within a day, they see the bullying being addressed, right? And so if you can imagine how empowering that is for a kid to realize I have this avenue to help people, especially when it's part of a broader climate in the school or in the community. Again, that goes back to our 2008 study that looked at this question and found that schools that have those safe school climates are the schools where those students are going to feel empowered to come forward, where they have at least one trusting relationship with an adult in the community. And there are ways to measure this. There are ways that schools can measure climate, and there's ways that schools can improve climate, things that are validated by research as approaches that can improve that level of trust and engagement from students. And so making sure that students know that they're not being snitches, as Emily said, they're not tattling on their friends, they're not getting people in trouble, that these programs exist to get themselves or their friends help.
Exactly, and I think that's why it's so important that we do everything we can to embed it in school culture and make it feel like a normal part of school life rather than this thing that you might only encounter one time in the course of your education. I know that's something that when I was in school, I wouldn't have known where to go. And hopefully for a lot of students that are in school now, that has changed and there's more information out there about where to go. And we've shared more information about these programs. Because I think something you both hit on is trust at a variety of different points in the process, right? Is the transparency about what's going to happen. So I think sometimes we get scared about, can we come forward with information about what's going to happen? We don't want to violate anyone's privacy, and we certainly don't. But I think there's that line between privacy violation and transparency about the general process rather than transparency about a specific individual case. So the more we can share with folks up front about this is what will happen if you come forward, this is how the process works, I think the more accessible it feels to them.
So I think that's a great point for schools everywhere to hear you say, because if you share, this is our tip line, this is the kind of things that you should report, or, please report it to your trusted adult, your SRO, your school counselor, whoever it is, what's going to happen? What's next? The fear of what's next sometimes, right, prevents people from wanting to report to these tip lines or to report to their school resource officer. They're afraid of getting in trouble. They're afraid of a lot of things. But knowing what kind of happens next, and even for your school staff and your parents and guardians in your community, I think that's really important. And something that is often missing in anonymous reporting programs is the what's next? What can I expect? What will I not be able to see? We obviously don't share disciplinary information because it's covered by FERPA. So that is what you're not going to see. And I think a lot of parents and guardians are looking for that. They're waiting for you to tell them, okay, there was this threat at my school. Why is Johnny still in class? So I think sharing what it is and what it's not is really important for transparency.
Right. It's important to set that expectation up front that you'll know before we ever go through the process that this is what you'll be told, this is what we can't share with the school community. And so it helps us give that sense of transparency in the beginning and then allow us not to share details about a specific student later on.
Yeah, I think the more that a community can share outcome measures, the better, right? So if a schools receive, some of these statewide reporting programs receive tens of thousands of tips a year, and if they're able to communicate to communities the percentage of them that result in bullying interventions or students receiving counseling services and things like that, and demonstrate what such a small fraction of reports result in something like a student arrest or a student expulsion, make up such a minuscule percentage of the response to the reports that come in. I think that's one part of the puzzle of building that trust with the community.
Exactly. It helps demystify it. It helps us understand what the left and right is. What are we doing with these reporting programs, and where can we dispel some of the scary mythology around it? That's fantastic. And I think that that really helps with getting the community involved and getting that buy-in to the process, because we can have the greatest theoretical reporting system in the world, but if folks aren't bought into it, they're not participating in it, it's not as great as it theoretically looks on paper. We're going to have a lot of challenges implementing it. So the success of these programs relies really heavily on the level of buy-in, both at the student level and the staff and community level. So with that in mind, what are some of those action steps that schools can be taking within the broader community to make reporting a part of their valued, respected K-12 school community culture? Emily?
So I would say education is a really big component of that, making sure that students, one, know that you have a reporting system. It's really fun to go into schools and ask them what their reporting system is, because you'll get all kinds of different answers, which is great, because sometimes it is, oh, I tell my school resource officer, oh, I go tell my school counselor, and then others will say, well, we have an anonymous reporting solution. So knowing that one exists, knowing how to use it, big education campaigns, training, I think is a huge component of having a tip line, but also talking to the students, asking them, you know, where would you go to report a threat of violence? You hear this person on the bus saying the following, what would you do? Running them through scenarios like that is really helpful to solidify, you know, where am I going to send this information? Where am I going to share it? And then also just having peers in your marketing. So that's one of the things that we do in Ohio, is we oftentimes have students involved in the marketing campaigns, because they don't want to hear from you and I what they're supposed to do. They want to hear from other students what they should be doing. And that has been a really big component of what we've done the past few years, and it seems to be very successful. Having the students create PSAs in their broadcast classrooms. They're all doing it as projects. They're very excited. They're the ones who are going to use their own language, their own slang, their own terminology to be able to communicate and say, hey, speak up for your peers, save their life. So I think that is a really big component of it.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And I like what you say about using existing infrastructure, places where you already have a broadcasting class, you're already going to do a project. Why not make it about this? So in your experience, have you seen folks be able to do things on these topics without any additional funding or resources?
Absolutely, and the teachers are always looking for projects. So being able to share a PSA contest where, you know, their marketing materials will go all across the state is very empowering for the students. I know that in Michigan they've done this before. I actually, you know, used their idea for another social media campaign that we ended up doing on school bus safety. They ran a contest with some students, and they used their own words to broadcast their bystander reporting program. And the students get really involved, really excited. Sometimes they'll come up with songs or raps to get included in it. They're really creative, where like my staff might not have thought of something like that. I know I wouldn't have thought of something, maybe my staff would, but I definitely wouldn't have thought of something like that. So they don't have to use any extra resources. They already have it on their campus. It's not going to cost them anything. And most of the time they're going to play it over their morning announcements. So morning announcements is another really good option for being able to broadcast this information.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so many different areas where we can very easily inject this into the regular part of the school day, things that are already happening, students are already familiar with. Let's just make reporting a part of those processes. And I liked what you said too about relying on other state partners, that you in the state of Michigan have done really similar projects and sort of created a brain trust there and borrowed from one another. I think that's a really great thing to implement. Is in a lot of these cases, there's no pride of ownership. We can all learn from one another and take what's working in another place.
So I would say using the Bystander Toolkit was a really good way for us to revise our program. So, you know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can rely on subject matter expertise from other agencies, like both of your agencies, or relying on other state programs to help, change yours up. It's not a worry about being a copycat. It's, let's figure out what works and let's try it. Let's revise our system based on the guide that came out. And going through the checklist, there's even a short version of it that's really helpful to have, give to schools to say, this is the reason why you should adopt an anonymous reporting solution.
Exactly. And Stephen, as we continue the conversation there, what have you seen in terms of the actionable steps that schools can take through the research, through the toolkit, and what kind of training programs have you seen that can be helped with effective to build awareness and encourage reporting? Yeah,
the training and promotion piece is where you can get as creative as you can be, right? We've seen schools that host assemblies for students, and like prizes are given out, and there's like keychains and stickers, and there's posters of the reporting program all over the school. We've seen teachers, school staff educating parents on back to school nights, right? Again, making sure that parents know and there's transparency for not only how to report, but what the outcomes would be. The DHS, over the last 20 years has made See Something, Say Something part of just the core DHS lexicon. And I know Ohio has your Speak Up, Save Lives phrase, right? And making those phrases and the imagery of the program part of the culture of the school. So I know some states that have had the programs for a while, they talk about you now have parents who have children in school, and the reporting programs were there when the parents were students, and they could say, like, this is just part of my memory of being a student, was that we had this reporting program, this avenue to get help for our classmates or ourselves, and now they have children using the same program. And so that investment in public awareness, promotional campaigns are effective, they get the word out. The more eyes that you can get the programs in front of, the better.
That's great. I think that's really impactful to hear what the impact can be as we continue to see this embedded in generation after generation, that it's going to feel more and more natural. You're learning it not just at school, but at home from your parents who know it too. So I think one thing you hit on as well is the training in the school community, both at the student level and the staff level. And I think we've talked a lot about with Emily, how can we use some of those existing mechanisms? So do either of you have thoughts on, as we're training school staff as well, how can we use some of those existing mechanisms within school and staff and teacher training to embed more of bystander reporting culture with our staff?
Yeah. So something that the National Threat Assessment Center is going to be talking about more in the months and years to come is how you can align and integrate behavioral threat assessment programs with other existing multidisciplinary teams at school. Because anybody who works in the school knows you have a lot of multidisciplinary teams for a variety of functions. And we see opportunities for increased communication and maybe shared training. Emily used an example of a tip coming in, and it might be something that's getting passed to one team, but they also know the counselor should know about this, right? And so we want to make sure, as we're pursuing training for reporting, that we're also thinking about like what other teams are going to work alongside these groups, and where can there be that information sharing. And that's going to also become especially important when you get to the management phase of a behavioral threat assessment process, where you're asking yourself, what can we do to support this student and ensure that this student is on a path toward wellness and a more positive outcome. And you're not going to do that in a silo. So we talk a lot about breaking down those silos of communication and making sure that everybody who has a role knows what they need to know, and that you have multiple voices at the table.
I think that's great, that it's not just a one and done. We don't just have the conversation once and then let it play out. It's a continuing conversation. It's something that, as we embed it in school culture, we continue to train folks on, we continue to make sure that there are follow-ups, and it's really a part of making sure that we have a safe community day in and day out in our schools.
So I think one of the other things that is important to remember is that it's a whole community approach, right? So if I'm the school bus driver, I should know that we have an anonymous reporting solution. I should know what happens. I should also know that we have a behavioral threat assessment team. I should know what it is. If I have a piece of information, because I see the kids in the morning in their social situations before they ever see anybody else. I see them in the afternoon. I know what kind of day they've had. I might have information that's really helpful to either the BTAM team or, related to a tip that comes in if there's a threat on the bus. They should know how to report it. And I think oftentimes they're forgotten when it comes to professional development days, where they may be talking about the tip line, they may be talking about BTAM. Those folks, our cafeteria workers, our librarians, there's some really great people in the school school that are the eyes and ears. We've awarded a custodian before for school safety because he was the eyes and ears of the school, and he was able to adjust things and report things as needed. So not forgetting about all of those folks when it comes to professional development, when it comes to training and education on these different pieces in the school, I think is really important. And then also making sure that your faculty and staff know what is going to happen. So sometimes we receive tips that are administrative complaints. They don't like the way something's been happening in the school, or, this student is very disruptive in their classroom. They're looking up some really, scary things, and it's making the teacher uncomfortable. If the teacher reports that to the tip line, that they're not going to be retaliated against, and that the administration is going to work with them. So it's just as important for students for that trust as it is for the staff in the building. I think that's another really important component.
You make a great point that the school community is vast. There are so many different people who are a part of it in sometimes multiple roles occupied by the same person. So we also need to be making sure that not only are they getting the training that they need, but they're being trained for each of the roles that they occupy in the school community. So if we have a teacher who's also an after-school coach, making sure that they're trained to understand the variety of situations that they could face. And I think you bring a good point too, that so many of the pieces of concerning information we receive can come after school hours. So it's not just about training folks to what happens during the school day, but how can we be responsive to all of those activities that might happen on our school campus outside of school hours, and what's happening not on our school campus, not during our school hours, but affects what's happening at school. Great. So I think this has been a really lively conversation. I think we're going to pivot to taking some audience Q&A. Any other thoughts you all would like to add, follow up on what we've discussed so far before we pivot to those questions?
Ready for the questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. So one of the questions that we've had come in that our team has pulled for us is, how do those teams that are managing tip lines deal with pranksters that may be submitting false reports into those tip lines?
So I can kind of start on that from an Ohio perspective, and maybe you can come from the research side here, but it really depends on your state system and what's set up. So there may be teleharassment laws in place that may govern this area. A lot of states also have information in their statute related to false tips. In Ohio, we don't have the false tips language out there, so we rely on that teleharassment kind of statute instead. But I think what's really important is figuring out, all of the information that you can. So having whoever is receiving that tip really analyze, how much information do we have, get it in the hands of people that can investigate and understand, whether that's law enforcement or the school staff. And if they do determine that it was a false tip, appropriately handling it. And not just that, but education in the school and training on, what the tip line is and what the tip line isn't, and what is going to happen if you choose to use it inappropriately. That's what we've done in Ohio, so it's been very helpful to have the campaign of what it is, what it isn't, and making sure that students know what could potentially happen to them if they were to make a false threat. We've done a media campaign with our sheriffs and our police officers on all of the things that could happen to you if you make a threat of violence and it was just a joke. You could have fines, you could be arrested, you may never get the career you want to have. There's a lot of things there. I know it sounds like a lot of scare tactics, but sometimes that does hit home. And if it doesn't hit home to the student, it's going to hit home to the parent because it's going to hit their pocketbook. So sometimes that can be a helpful conversation, at least from our point, when we don't have a statute governing that specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we don't want to engage in scare tactics, but we do want to educate. We want students to understand that when they may not think that it's serious to submit a tip, it is, and it can impact not only them, but the broader community, where folks may be afraid that something is real and only to behold that it is a false tip. So very important, not just to the student, but the community. Anything you would add there, Stephen?
Emily really covered it. From our position at the federal level, we know that the laws surrounding false reporting vary state to state. So from a response perspective, it's going to be a local question. But from our perspective, as Emily said, the real piece is training and educating students on what it means to submit a prank and how it's not a joke, and it's going to have serious consequences, and again, that's taking away from the resources that could be helping other people.
Absolutely. All right, I think we have a couple of other questions that have been submitted here. I think we had one where a student was seeing the school counselor and advised that his father wouldn't allow him to see a therapist, but the counselor still wanted to intervene and assist. Is there anything else that could have been done to intervene and help the student?
So we have seen this exact case, so maybe it's an Ohio person out there asking it, but we've seen it a few times, and it really depends. So there's some state legislation that will not permit the counselor to do more than, you know, what they're able to do in the school setting. They may not be able to give them the therapy that they need, but during school hours, they can give them a little bit of extra help. They can check in with them as a school counselor would. You know, school resource officer can do the same thing, take them under their wing, you know, check in with them. You know, even if it's not formal therapy, there could be something that they could do during school hours, and just making sure that there's regular check-ins with the student. That's really limited, I know. It's not the answer that this person is probably looking for, but there's not a whole lot you can do if they're a minor and the parent says no. So in some states, there's statute that prohibits them from doing any of that extra counseling during school hours. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, I mean, one of the central, the foundational principles of behavioral threat assessment is rapport building, right? And so in school threat assessment cases, right, so often we're talking about the value that comes with having a rapport, a positive rapport between a school and the parents. And so in a case like the one that was just described, the one thing I would suggest is to not assume necessarily anything, but to maybe communicate with the family and get their perspective. The National Threat Assessment Center consults with schools quite a bit. We actually had one case not that long ago where the school understood the father of a student of concern to be really standoffish and unapproachable, and there's a bit of a history there where the school said, like, we really don't like to reach out to dad. But we encouraged them to give it another try. And when they did, they actually got a very different response than they had anticipated. And the dad became a lot more engaged and was really concerned about his son's well-being. And it actually blossomed into a really positive relationship between the school and the family. So maybe in a scenario like that, first suggestion would be to reach out to the family and engage and find out, does the dad not want the son to see a therapist because he doesn't think they can afford it? Or is there another reason that might be a thing that the school or social services or somebody else could support with, and maybe the dad is looking for help as well.
Right, that's a great point. And I think to your point, Emily, is sometimes we are limited, we're not in the exact perfect scenario, but we do still want to find a way to help the student the best that we're able to. And so I think to Stephen's point, sometimes when you're hitting your head against the wall, trying to think of what the best solution may be, sometimes let's bring the parent into the conversation. And as we talk about various scenarios, they may latch onto one of those scenarios. If we don't think scenario A can help our student, we might think scenario B or C may help. So to where we can bring everyone into the conversation, we have to try everything we can. Absolutely. So we know that creating a bystander reporting system involves a lot of logistics, and sometimes it can involve a lot of planning and 24/7 access, because tips can come in at any time of the day. So what are some of the best practices that you've seen to protect educators with their out-of-school time while still making sure that we keep that bystander reporting system monitored and fully accessed?
So from an Ohio example again, I would say that, you know, we contact local law enforcement when there is an immediate threat to life on cases, and we will also contact the school at the same time. So we have more than one individual that we will start calling down the line to see if we can find someone that will pick up their phone. And the school designates it, which is really great. It's usually administrators in our case, so that has been really helpful. It's not necessarily at the educator level, it's the administration of the school. So they provide the contact that is available for after hours, and we will call until we get you. Mainly because there's a threat to student life, and if we need it, we need it. But most of the time, we don't call you in the middle of the night if we don't think that there's an immediate concern for life. And I think that that has been helpful, and setting up programs that way is very helpful, making sure that they know that if there is a bullying concern, if there's an administrative complaint that does not risk life or anything like that, then this is how you're going to be notified. And you're going to get it in your email first thing if you decide to be up at 1 in the morning and read your email, or you'll get it first thing in the morning when you start your day. And that will only call you for those kind of emergencies in the middle of the night. So I think having that kind of triage hierarchy of systems is helpful for that reason, to protect them after hours, but also setting up the expectations up front is really good.
Right, it's not one size fits all, and each scenario is going to be different, so we can respond differently based on the needs of the scenario.
Yeah.
Anything you would add, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the resources that you have, right? So statewide, a lot of the statewide reporting apps are staffed by dedicated call centers that are staffed 24/7, right? So that obviously you're not having that same level of concern for teacher availability. But we also know that there are more local programs that are, it might be an app or a reporting system that is purchased by a school district or a county. And we've seen that kind of implemented a few different ways, but some of them have, reports that are routed to the superintendent and the school principals during working hours, and then after working hours, they're routed to the sheriff's office or local law enforcement for that initial triage. If it's a threat to life, law enforcement would respond. If it's something that can wait till working hours again, the report will get forwarded back. So there's some communities can build these systems in ways that work for them, depending on the resources they have.
I'm actually glad you brought up the law enforcement component of that, because I think that's a question we get a lot too, is how can schools work effectively with their law enforcement? I think you mentioned a great example there, but where can we bring law enforcement or other community partners in to be effective parts of these bystander reporting systems?
Yeah, they're a really important piece of the puzzle. A lot of schools are fortunate to have a dedicated, passionate school resource officer. Others have really positive relationships with their local police departments or their county sheriff's offices. Certainly, law enforcement are often involved in behavioral threat assessments of students who have either made threats or displayed another type of behavior that indicates a potential for violence. But that relationship can start not in the midst of a tragedy, but well before then. And we've seen a lot of schools do really amazing work in developing relationships proactively with law enforcement partners. We see police officers who coach sports teams and make themselves present at the school, where students know them and they're greeting students during the day and chaperoning school events and things like that. So law enforcement are an incredibly important part of obviously school violence prevention, but the relationships can start now, and they can start building the rapport with their partners alongside the mental health community, social services, parents, and everyone else.
And I would say one of the other things that we've noticed is some sheriff offices and police departments actually set up their own line. So in Ohio, you're not required to use our tip line. It's a free one, but you're not required to. So local control, where, we've had sheriff offices set up a phone number that, students can call anytime to report anything that they need. And that's something that doesn't cost the school any money. Which is a great cost-effective option, but also it builds that relationship between law enforcement. So we will never say that ours is better than that or anything. Whatever works for the school and works for the first responders, that's what works for us. So if you decide to have this line set up to your SRO, where they're going to answer at all hours of the day, that's fine, as long as the education and training is been done on it. That's totally fine. You don't need a big fancy solution to be able to have bystander reporting. You actually don't need a solution at all. You just need a mechanism. So, I report to you and you share that information. So as long as you have those relationships, that alone can be a good solution.
I like the way you both approach that slightly differently. I think, there's an important role to bring in law enforcement and other community partners, both with our students and with our staff and the structures we're creating. So it's important that we have a good working relationship, but it's also important that we're not just bringing law enforcement in a punitive way. We're bringing them in an accessible way to be a value add to students, not just, the scary, I'm in trouble 100%. Disciplinary option as well. Yep. That's great. Well, I think you all hit on a great option with cost here as well. We also got a question about what are some of the most cost-effective reporting options that schools have available to them.
So you can build forms very easily these days in Google Forms or Microsoft Forms or whatever method. And if you wanted to have an online reporting platform, you could certainly do it that way with no additional cost. You could have, you come to this person in the school at any time of day, here's their phone number, here's their email, this is what you report to. Those are all options that don't cost them anything extra. You don't have to go with a provider out there that provides a full solution and a dashboard and all of that stuff. In addition to that, some states do offer a free solution for their state, and I really implore our school districts to reach out and look for those, because in some cases you'll see that school districts are applying for federal funds for an anonymous reporting solution when the state offers one for free. So just checking into some of those things, it really is helpful.
That's amazing.
Emily covered it. But I remember, years ago, more closer in proximity to the Columbine shooting, we would talk about having drop boxes of for students to write notes on and drop them in. And obviously we've surpassed that in 2025, but it still demonstrates a point that you can be creative. The principles are always going to apply. This approach is scalable. When we talk about bystander reporting, we're not just talking about a smartphone app. It's a system of accessibility and promotion where students know that they have some avenue to report concerns. Because even if you have the most robust technical support reporting program, you still might have students, you're still going to have students who would rather approach the trusted teacher that they know or the school resource officer or their coach and just talk to them directly, right? And so the smartphone application isn't going to answer all the questions. It's having multiple avenues. It's making sure that people know what and how to report and what the response is going to be.
Right, and I think there's so many benefits to that trusted adult relationship, both in getting students to be willing to report, but then if you're having that ongoing conversation with that trusted adult, we can continue to follow up, we can continue to ask you questions about it, and that trusted adult can also make sure that you as the person coming forward gets the support you need too, along with a variety of other benefits for your academic and social performance as well. So I think that's great. Well, I think as we wrap up here, I want to give just a few housekeeping reminders before we move to our last question, where we'll end with Emily and Stephen on one more question for them. So I just want to remind folks that we are about to put a final poll for the end of our conversation into the chat. So if you're looking to get credit for your attendance, please make sure to fill out that final poll and make sure that you filled out the first poll as well. And we're interested in your feedback as well. Additionally, we will be sending out a follow-up email that includes access to some of the resources that we've discussed today. So you received a lot of them in your Q&A and alert panels, but we'll make sure that you have that permanent record as well. And then if you're looking for more resources beyond what we discussed, either on bystander reporting or school safety and other topics generally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention schoolsafety.gov as a resource that's always available to you for free. You can go to schoolsafety.gov for resources on a variety of topics ranging from bystander reporting, targeted violence, bullying prevention, mental health, school climate, and others. And you can also access resources tailored specifically for specific audience members. So if you're looking for resources, we highly recommend the interagency website that we run here at the Department of Homeland Security with our partners at the U.S. Departments of Education, Health and Human Services, and Justice as well. So with that, let's go ahead and wrap up. We do have one final question. We wanted to just ask you as we close, Emily, from your perspective, what are some of the success stories that you've seen where a timely, well-managed response to a report helped provide a school with the chance to intervene and redirect an individual and potentially prevent harm to themselves or others?
So we call these gold star tips in our state, where we're able to follow a tip all the way through to completion. It doesn't mean there's going to be, a mass casualty event or anything that we've stopped. It's really just anything that we're able to follow, from beginning to end. And I asked my team before I came here what their hot hitting ones were. So the first one they mentioned was that we had a student that reported that their peer was cutting themselves. They had the marks all up their arm, they've been hiding it with sweatshirts, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know who to report it to, and they just they contacted us. So we were actually able to get a wellness check immediately on the student because they had said that they were planning to go deeper this time. So law enforcement went out to the house. Parents had absolutely no idea what was going on. They didn't know that their student was struggling. They took them to the hospital to get checked out and make sure that their wounds were okay and not infected. And then the next day, the school counselor was able to meet with both the student and the parent and then meet with them separately to kind of talk about what's going on, make sure everybody's comfortable. And they were able to get some intervention supports and therapy put in place. And then they had periodic check-ins with that student. So we were able to get that student from, feeling like they had to harm themselves all the way to, they're in therapy, they're doing well. Their school resource officer was checking back in with them regularly in addition to the counselor, and it didn't feel pressured. So the student was pretty happy. The parents were very happy that the peer had reached out and that kind of a thing.
That's amazing.
I would say one of the other ones that we received was actually from a parent, and their student was suicidal and they didn't know what to do. And these days, again, like I said, we have 988 out there where you can reach out. There are crisis text lines that you're able to reach out to, but this parent didn't know what to do. And they didn't know where to go. They didn't know if they should talk to the counselor. And so they messaged us, and we were able to get them in contact with the counselor. We were able to get them a wellness check too. They decided, not time to go to the hospital or anything yet, but let's get you into some counseling. Let's get you into some therapy and see if we can do regular check-ins. So the counselor met with them once a week, and they were actually able to get them on a better path. And everybody was comfortable about it because, it wasn't something that cost them money. They didn't know where to go, and they were able to get an answer. And sometimes it's just getting a real person to talk to you to give you an answer that makes all the difference. So I gave you two that were kind of self-harm, suicidology, but those are the kind of things that come in that you're like, wow, this really did save a life.
That's amazing. And I think it's a great note to end on, that we can make so much difference in the lives of individual students and in the lives of broad school communities. So I want to thank you, Emily and Stephen, for all of the great insights that you shared. I think your perspectives really paired well together. And I want to thank everybody who attended today and took time out of their busy schedule to join us in this conversation. We really hope that this is the beginning and starts a conversation that you can take back and continue having in your school communities. And we can continue to work together to make students and schools communities safe. So thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at another event.